Hi, how you doing? Justin here. Today we are going to be talking about adding vibrato to your blues lead guitar playing. Now, vibrato is a really important technique to get down. It's very expressive. A lot of guitar players, it's kind of an important part of their guitar character is the way they do their vibrato. Now, we're going to be mainly looking at one type of vibrato, which is the most commonly used. I call it a pivot vibrato, but it's worth being aware that there are other kind of mechanical ways of getting the vibrato sound on. And I just want to give you a quick kind of rundown on what they are. So the one that we're going to be looking at today mostly is called pivoting vibrato, and it's very similar to string bending. So it's using this kind of whole wrist kind of movement that we looked at when we've just been looking at our string bending. So it's very much this kind of motion, right? The arm controlling the wrist. And it's by far the most commonly used type of vibrato, the most common mechanical mechanism that gets you a vibrato, but there are some others. Eric Clapton tends to use his whole arm. There's quite a few of the older school guitar players like Freddie King as well that use this technique. And basically, instead of having a pivot point on the side of your first finger to pivot around, you put a finger down and you actually lift off the whole arm. So there's the only point of contact with the guitar neck is the tip of the finger touching the string. Again, you're wobbling your whole arm up and down like that. Now, it's a very cool technique. It was never my personal favorite, but it's very effective. If you want some more information on that, there's a whole lesson on that on the website. So if you happen to really fancy Eric Clapton or you fancy exploring this other style, then have a go at it. But for most people, I think it's a bit better to save that one for a little later on, okay? Because it's a little bit more technical and it requires quite a lot more practice to kind of get down, or at least it did for me. The other really common one that you're likely to see is a B.B. King style, which is kind of a mixture of the pivot thing and the hand off thing, because he'll put a finger down and then wobble his whole hand about like a butterfly. Okay, so it's a very different. It's still using the pivot, but the thumb's off as well. Okay, and then you kind of shake it all about. And again, I've got a whole lesson on doing that particular one. It's quite a difficult one to get. Well, again, I find it difficult. You might not, so maybe it's worth you going and having a look. But my recommendation would be that you stick with this pivot style vibrato when you're starting out, because it's a lot easier to kind of get down, and it's got other advantages as well that we'll probably get into later in this course. The one that isn't used much in blues that I still see people using quite a lot is a kind of a classical vibrato. Now, with classical vibrato, instead of moving a string up and down like we've done with all of those ones I've talked about so far, you move your hand side to side. Now, this is particularly effective on a nylon string guitar because the string gets pulled. When you move your hand back this way, you're actually pulling the string tighter, like you're using the friction of your finger to push down and pull that way, which tightens the string. And then when you move your finger that way, you're pushing the string toward the bridge and making it kind of looser. Now, it kind of works on electric guitar. You hear if I do, here's a note without vibrato. And now I'll add some side-to-side vibrato. You can hear it's there, right? There's definitely a little bit. Here's nothing. Here's with the side-to-side. It's there, it's just quite subtle compared to, okay? The up and down one is a lot more, you've got a lot more range that you can do. You can do a very small movement or a very big movement depending on the style that you like. The side-to-side one is kind of valid maybe if you were doing a ballad. Valid if you were doing a ballad. I've got rhymes in my lessons now, cool. The one time you might find yourself wanting to use that kind of side-to-side vibrato is if you were playing a ballad, something very subtle, and you wanted just a very delicate kind of a feel on a particular note, then that's where you're likely to use that side-to-side thing. But that's kind of not really the flavor that we're going for in this particular blues course. We're looking a bit more straight ahead kind of traditional blues approach where the pivot vibrato is a lot more effective for that kind of thing. So let's get to a close-up and check out how to do it. So hopefully you're familiar with the mechanics of string bending now, okay? This motion, this idea of using your whole arm and your wrist and the pivot point on your first finger to create that feeling for a string bend. Okay, now the thing with vibrato that we're going to start off with is the same motion here, the pivot on the first finger. only we're going to be pulling down to start off with rather than pushing up that we would have done for a bend. And the reason is that most people find pulling down for vibrato a little easier. It's totally valid to do to bend up for a vibrato. So here's coming down, here's going up. You see, they sound more or less identical, okay? But pulling down for most people, most of the time, feels a little bit more comfortable. So I'd recommend that's where you start, although you should definitely be experimenting and seeing what works well for you personally, right? So start by putting your third finger on the 7th fret of the 3rd string. Back it up with the 2nd finger, okay? You don't have to always have more than one finger on like you do for bending, but it can really help. And just for this exercise, I'd put 1st finger on as well. You don't need to have 1st finger on, but it really helps to have as many fingers on the string when you're doing a vibrato as are available, okay? So in this case, we've got all 3 fingers. 3rd finger is in the 7th fret of the 3rd string. So start off with just play that note and pull down, and then let the string pull itself back to its natural position, okay? So you just kind of relax the tension in your hand. You've got here, pull it away, relax. And let the string come back to its natural position, its fundamental note, okay? The note that's in tune. Let it pull back. Play. And let it come back. Really important, just play, relax, and let it come back to its natural spot. When you feel like you've got a hang of that relaxing and letting it go back to its fundamental, try and let it go a few times, so like 3 times before you have to pick again. So pick, 1, 2, 3. And then again, pick, 1, 2, 3. One thing that you will find actually helps is thinking about pushing the string ever so slightly over the fundamental, right? In the opposite direction. So if you've pulled down, when you come back, I think about just going up a little bit. Now, I don't think I actually ever do, but just doing that, thinking about it, really helps me make sure I get back to that fundamental correctly and that I'm not kind of half getting back. It's got that, you know, a little millimeter makes such a difference to the tuning there. So it's really important that you're getting back to that fundamental every time. Once you're confident doing 3 in a row, see how long you can keep the motion going for. So just pick and just let it keep going till the note fades away. Even after the note's faded away, sometimes you'll kind of get a bit of a comeback if the string makes a bit of a scratch on something. That's pretty much gone. And again. Just keep going, keep the pressure down, and try and keep that movement going as long as you can, and trying to keep it nice and consistent. Okay, now once you're feeling like you've got that mechanics going okay, the next thing I'd recommend that you start with is the width, like how wide a vibrato are you going to do. So at the moment we're just doing a little vibrato. It's not even a semitone, it's just a nice, quite subtle vibrato. It's quite nice. But as soon as you want to, a good way of exploring it is to look at the different pitches that you could go to. And I don't think you actually have to go to a particular pitch when you're doing a vibrato. It's never something that I think about, but it can be useful for practice, okay? So if you look at a semitone, okay, and then try and do your vibrato nice and slowly about that amount. Try and get a feeling for how far you're moving to get a semitone. And then just start to speed up the frequency or the speed. Okay, then try doing a whole tone. Now this is a very, very wide vibrato. Okay. Yeah, it sounds a bit weird, slow, that one. Quite common with the rock guys to do a whole tone bend vibrato. A little bit less common in the blues. But what that's all about is just practicing, getting your movement there. And it's also introduced the idea of speed. So the two variables that you've got with vibrato is depth or width, which is the amount of vibrato you do, and frequency or speed, which is how fast you're doing it. So a very wide, slow vibrato sounds a bit weird. Sounds better fast. A small vibrato can be really slow and not sound too weird, or can be quite fast and it doesn't sound too weird either. So experiment with all of those different variables on that one note and see what you fancy, and we're going to talk a bit more about emulating other people a little later on. So once you feel confident with that, I would recommend that you have a go at doing a vibrato with your first finger. Very, very common to do a vibrato with the first finger. And it's exactly the same rules apply, but you'll see that the pivoting action is a little bit more obvious. You can see the pivot there of the first finger. You just have to lock your first finger in place, and that motion of moving your hand will give you the vibrato. So again, just start with a really small one. Get used to the feeling of it. Should feel pretty easy. Then try a slightly wider one. It's a semitone. Tone's going to be a bit tricky, I think, with the first finger. It's possible. Don't normally do a tone that much with the first finger, but again, you get the idea. It's really good for working your mechanics and experimenting with the speed. Now, one thing that you're going to find on the third string, it's pretty easy to pull down like that. On the second string, you can't pull down for a tone bend, because you do that and you pull it off the side of the neck, okay? Never sounds good. Well, if you guys, Steve, I can make it sound cool, I can't. Okay, so here you're going to have to push up. Okay, very often if I'm doing a subtle bend on the second string, I'll still be pulling down, but very common as well to be pushing up at this point. Okay, same with the first finger. You can pull down or push up. Okay, so again, have an experiment and see what feels good for you. Okay, because different people are going to find different things feel comfortable, and either one is fine. On the thinner string, you're going to have to go up because you don't have any space to go down. You're just going to pull the string straight off the fingerboard, right? So, really important, again, that you work on here. Nice small one, quite a wide one. But really making sure you come back to that fundamental every time. It's so important. Don't let yourself go, because you're not really doing anything there. Well, you might be doing a bend vibrato. We'll get more in that in part 2 of the Blues League guitar course. But in this first part, we're working on vibrato on one note. So it's really important that you come back to the fundamental. First finger again. See, it's all this little pivot. Now, I've just happened to have got the scratch. Now, I don't know if you can hear, but that note just keeps on going. And I'm still uncertain exactly what caused that, but I can hear it. It's a very loud, audible scratch of the string against the fret. And when it happens, you can keep a bend going like this for ages, especially when you've got loads of distortion. It sounds amazing. I'm sure it's some sort of chemical reaction between the string and the fret getting warm by doing over. You don't tend to get this in real life. It's only when you're practicing, because you're doing the same bend or vibrato over and over again. So I would really recommend, if you're just learning vibrato for the first time, that you be doing at least 5 minutes practice a day where you're really focused in on your vibrato. Now, there's a couple of kind of stages of it. The first one would be probably a few weeks or maybe a month where you're just practicing the vibrato as I showed you there. So you just pick a note and you work on changing the speed and the depth, really focusing on the mechanics of it, okay? Not worrying too much about the sound and what it's going to, how you're going to apply it, but just really focusing on the mechanic and making it feel good, because there's a lot to be said said, for the repetition of it, just doing it over and over again, really help get your fingers kind of ready to do it, ready for it to become kind of instinctive. The next thing that I'd recommend you do is try and apply it to a lick or two. So pick some of your favorite licks that have got a spot to do some vibrato, and then concentrate on the vibrato being the kind of the thing that where you're focusing your attention, but you're playing the whole lick. So you might be doing like, so I'm making sure still that my bend's in tune, that the rest of the timing of it's good and all of that sort of stuff. But my main focus when I'm practicing for that 5 minutes would be the vibrato on that last note, how long it's going for. So one thing I get questions about all of the time is extraneous string noise, okay? When you're trying to practice your vibrato and some of the other strings ring out, right? Very, very common problem. You're sitting there practicing your vibrato, you get all of this sort of extra strings ringing out, okay? They need to be muted, okay? It's just whenever you're playing string bending, or actually almost anything, particularly in rock when you've got a high gain thing, strings will just ring out on their own even without being touched if you've got a lot of gain going on, a lot of volume. So it's very important that you understand the basic principles, which is every note that you play, all of the strings beneath it, like toward the ground, should be muted by the underneath of the fingers, okay? So underneath the first finger, usually if I'm doing here, okay, the first finger is muting the thinnest two strings, right? So when I'm playing, they're muted, they're not going to ring out, okay? If I'm playing with the third finger, very often it's the edge of the first finger, sometimes the edge of the third finger as well, okay? And all the strings above the note I'm playing are either with the palm of the hand just resting on the strings near the bridge, or the edge of the thumb, okay? So I'll very often use the edge of my thumb just to rest on strings 4, 5 and 6 in this particular case, so I'm playing the vibrato on string 3. Okay, it just sits there because it's completely deadens it if I use the edge of my thumb there. Yeah, so the pick is kind of in between strings 3 and 4, and the edge of the thumb just mutes those strings out completely. If I was playing on second string, thumb would lay over strings 3, 4, 5 and 6. It's muting all of them. It's a really, really good technique, this, the edge of the thumb, but you can also use the palm of the hand. It depends on the kind of the lick, and there's not really a set rule. It very much depends on the lick and the circumstance, and you're going to have to try and figure out both. And the best way of doing that is just when you hear a string noise when you're playing, figure out what one feels comfortable and start practicing it to make it kind of work for you. But don't give it too much thought. Just be aware of it, and usually your body will kind of sort things out for you, which is kind of lucky. One thing I will mention to you as well, that you sometimes, particularly the first finger bend, can you hear that? There's a second note ringing out. So as I'm pulling it down, it's picking up the second string. Now sometimes that can sound really cool, but if you don't want it, you're going to have to use one of your fingers, either fingers 2 or 3, to touch down on the string. So sometimes I'll play a note, thumb will, if it's on the third string, thumb will cover strings 4, 5 and 6, and I'll use my second and third fingers on this hand and just rest them on the strings. So that way I know I'm definitely only getting the one note that I want. Now all this is starting to sound pretty complicated, but it's the kind of thing that if you're aware of, that it's not a miracle that there's no strings ringing out when you listen to the great guys playing guitar. Okay, it's something that's been dealt with at some point. Sometimes it's not conscious, right? I never really learned how to do it. I just did it, and then through teaching I had to figure out how I was doing it. And that might be the same for you. Some people, they have a real problem with it and have to really think about it, and that's cool too, okay? Everyone struggles with different things, so don't feel bad if this is something that you have to really concentrate on, because there's other things probably that you pick up that are really easy that some other guys really struggling with, that manage to get the string muting really easy, okay? So don't be too fussed about that. And the last thing I want to talk about today is emulating other guitar players. Now, vibrato is a very, very kind of personal thing, and the style of it is quite personal. It'll help define your character as a player. So it's something that you want to pay a bit of attention to in that respect. And one of the things I found really helped me develop my vibrato was listening to the guys with great vibrato that I really liked and trying to copy them, because I'm never going to sound like B.B. King, I'm never going to sound like Eric Clapton, I'm never going to sound like Eric Johnson, I'm never going to sound like Larry Carlton's another one, and I'd listen to their vibrato and really try and copy it. And in the process of copying it, it kind of helped me find my own vibrato. right? But I think it's a really, really important step for guitar players, is to find the guys that they really, really like the sound of and really try and copy them, both licks, vibrato, tone, everything. Because in the process of that, you learn how to make your instrument sound a particular way, and that can be really, really beneficial. So I strongly recommend that you spend a bit of time trying to listen out for the guys that you really like their vibrato, and when you find an example of it that sounds really good, try and learn that particular little bit and then try and copy it and make it that, see if you can get your guitar playing to sound exactly like theirs, whether, no matter who it is, whether it's David Gilmour, whether it's Albert King or B.B. King, whoever it is, see if you can really copy their style right down. If you can find some video, that can be helpful as well to see how they're doing it. You know, if you're into Eric Clapton, you definitely want to be doing the arm off thing, because it does sound different, even though it's a different mechanism, but it does have a different kind of tonal thing going on to it as well. I don't know why that is. In theory it shouldn't, you know, but it does. So you have to pay attention to that and try and copy the guys that you really like and allow that to guide your style of vibrato. So I think that's it for now. You just got to go out and practice your vibrato as much as you can. Like I said, a good idea is 5 minutes a day to start off with, just really focusing on that one thing, and then try and allow it to just infect your playing all the time, because if you get a bad vibrato, it can really make your playing suck. So stay on it. Make sure that your vibrato is really, really nice, and it kind of expresses how you feel about it. So I'll see you for plenty more lessons very soon. You take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.